Thomas and Friends, episode 83. They call him Mr. George. One day, Jack, Alfie, Oliver, Nelson, Byron, and Patrick were having a conversation in a field near the yard when suddenly trouble arrived in the name of George. "George," said Byron, "what are you doing here?" "That's Mr. George to you," said George. "Now, who would want to call you Mr. George?" said Nelson. "That great Eastern break fan when we first met," said George. "What was his name, Bullfrog?" "Toad," said Alfie. "He's Great Western, and he calls everybody Mr. and Mrs. He's just that nice and polite, unlike you." "Just for that, I won't be joining you in your conversation," said George. "I highly doubt a road vehicle like you would even join our conversation," said Oliver, but George wouldn't listen. Instead, he just rolled away. Oliver was sitting in a shed nearby, and he heard everything. "Man, I wish I could teach George a lesson," he said. "But what can I do?" With that, Oliver raced away to find a train. George was rolling along down the road when he saw Birdie. "I heard that you've been mean to Jack in the Pack today, George," said Birdie. "Yeah, so what?" said George. "I don't like it how you're being so rude," said Birdie. "So stop being so mean, otherwise your name is Mud." George just ignored Birdie and he continued on his journey. George was going over the track that led to the grain loader. He was going over the track when suddenly his back wheels got caught on one of the rails. "Great," said George, "I'm stuck." And without knowing, George heard Oliver coming down the track and he ran into him. "Ow," said George. "Serves you right," said Oliver. "Hang on, Mr. Mud," said Toad. "We'll be right back after we deliver this treasure chest to the museum." And with that, Oliver and Toad rolled away, leaving an embarrassed George behind.